everyone, and welcome back to Global Equity Spotlight, Travel Edition, a series where we unpack on-the-ground insights from our analysts who have recently returned from their travels. Today I have Adam with me, who's recently returned from a trip to China where he spent 2 weeks there. So Adam, let's kick off. What are some sort of high-level takeaways from the trip and any sort of notable experiences that you can share with us?
Cool, thanks, Karina. I think just to give an overview, so it was a 2-week trip. It was really interesting. So I started down south in Shenzhen, where I spent a week with Bank of America. They had a conference, a 3-day conference, followed by a 2-day field trip. And in the week after that, I was in Shanghai. You'll see a photo of me going for a run along the Bund with the spectacular Shanghai skyline behind it. Just a fun emerging tradition we've got in our team is we typically go for city runs when we go to these interesting exotic places, which is a great way of getting some exercise and getting a feel for the local culture. It's actually amazing how just running around the city, you actually experience so much on the run. So I spent a further week in Shanghai. That was with JP Morgan, who hosted an excellent China conference, a China summit they call it. That was also a 2-day field trip and a 3-day conference. So a really excellent time. Met a very wide variety of companies, I think around 30 company meetings in total, across a wide variety of sectors. This was an interesting little gift I came back with. Still trying to figure out what it is. So it was a gift from Tencent when I met them. So one of my follow-ups is to figure out what this means. But yeah, a very cool little gift and a nice little memory from my trip.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. It sounds like a really wonderful trip with some really interesting takeaways.
Yeah.
Let's delve into the scale of infrastructure that we're seeing coming out of China at the moment.
Yeah, so the beauty of these trips is being on the ground, is experiencing it firsthand. And I think the quality of infrastructure was one of the most positive impressions from the trip. So maybe 3 experiences to share, and we show some photos of this. Firstly was taking a fast train. So on an interesting day out over the weekend, I went from Shanghai to Suzhou, which is 100 kilometers away. And to get there took only 25 minutes on the fast train. So I think it maxed out at about 290 kilometers an hour. Very smooth, very efficient, perfectly on time. So that was a really cool experience. And then secondly, getting around Shanghai, I used the metro, so I was traveling with the locals. And you can see on the photo we showed just of the time board of the train, how it's actually measured to the second and pretty much arrives to the second. So that again just shows the efficiency of the Chinese system. And then thirdly, it was very cool during the trip. I got to go up 2 of the 5 highest buildings in the world. So you'll see a photo of the Ping An Finance Center in Shenzhen, which is the 5th highest building in the world at about 600 meters. And it's literally going into the clouds on this day, which just reminded me of growing up of reading Jack and the Beanstalk. And this was like a modern version of that. So really cool infrastructure experiences.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adam. That sounds like a really incredible experience, especially seeing those buildings up in the clouds. So maybe now we can touch on what we're seeing coming out of some of the EV manufacturers. I know you met with a couple of them while you were there. Maybe you can give us some insights in terms of technology trends and what you're seeing on the ground coming out of China.
Yeah. So firstly, both kind of on the ground and from the meeting. So one of the biggest impressions was the abundance of EVs. So particularly in these tier 1 cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai, I actually hardly saw a combustion car on the road. It was pretty much all EVs, completely dominating, which I thought was fascinating. And also the abundance of local brands. I actually saw only a handful of Teslas, but many local brands and amazing quality. I'll show one picture is from a premium model from a local brand. And that just shows the quality of these Chinese EVs, which I think has global implications because I think a lot of these brands are going to be expanding overseas in time. So I think it's going to become, I think the whole global market is going to become a lot more competitive as they expand. Within China, it's highly competitive. I think that's one of the kind of, shall we say, mega themes that came out of the trip was competition. Like I think China is inherently competitive, but it just feels very elevated at the moment. So I remember early in my career, consumer goods CEO saying that when the growth stops, the fighting starts. And I think what we often get a double whammy in these macro situations where there's less of a macro tailwind, the companies have to fight a lot harder to grow. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment in China. So I think it does mean, in many respects, I came away thinking this is more of a stock pickers market going forward. And partly of that is due to competition. I think you just need to navigate this very carefully. And the EV industry is an interesting example where it's clearly a very strong secular growth theme, but it's also highly competitive. So a lot of these, I think there's only a handful, I think it's 2 or 3 of the EV companies that are actually making money at the moment. One of them is BYD, who I met, which I think is a very interesting business. But yeah, it just shows, I think, highlights that theme of competition being it was across, it wasn't just like 1 or 2 industries, it was very much across the board that competition is a major issue in China.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, maybe we can spend some time talking about the property bubble and what you saw on the ground in China. Obviously, that's quite a big theme that's playing out. Maybe you can give us your insights from that.
Sure. Yeah, this was a very interesting topic to delve into because I think tends to be the $1 million question in China is what's happening to the property market. We know historically it accounted for as much as 30% of GDP, so it's a very big driver of the economy. And I think what I did come away with was, despite having had quite a major correction already, the outlook remains cautious, and I think it's for structural reasons. Firstly, you've got continue to have excess supply. So an interesting stat, I think the unsold inventory is equivalent to 6 years worth of supply. So that shows how much there's still a lot of inventory to clear. And secondly, and I think a major long-term headwind is the aging demographics. We know over time the population is actually in a decline in China. So you're structurally going to have lower demand for property whilst having this excess supply situation. So I think I actually had quite a few expert meetings on the topic, so I think we've come away a lot more informed. And one of the experts put it well, was saying it's still dark. It's not the darkest, but it's still dark. And that just shows maybe the worst is over for the property market. But it doesn't mean we're going to get any kind of strong recovery. It might just it's starting to moderate. Another very interesting theme from the trip was divergence, and we're seeing this in the property market. So we are seeing some stabilization. Funny enough, the cities I went to, Shanghai and Shenzhen, are actually starting to see some green shoots. The caveat to that is stimulus driven, and one of the experts commented that when you see the stimulus reduced, the property is tending to weaken again. But the major problem is in those lower tier cities where they're typically seeing net migration of population, part of the urbanization theme. So there's no green shoots. I think that's going to be an interesting theme going forward for China in many respects, is this increasing divergence. So tier 1 doing better, but the lower tier struggling. And that's really feeding through into also the muted outlook for the consumer. I think the headwind of the property market, there's very high uncertainty around job security. So it's interesting they say that uncertainty at the moment is even higher than was during COVID. And that I think is a combination of the weaker macro and the uncertainty of AI, which is obviously a big theme globally, and we're really seeing that impact consumer confidence. So I think this is driving the ongoing high savings and the low spend rates in China, which looks likely to continue.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam. It's been really interesting hearing your sort of macro takeaways along with what you actually saw on the ground. To the audience, thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time.